you know, I partnered with Jessica White Plume at Warwick Schiller and Robin Schiller on a retreat this past weekend. And, one of the things that Warwick talks about that has been definitely my experience, which is, when you immerse yourself in things that maybe you think you've got a good amount of knowledge around, you still end up learning so much by even putting it together to share with other people and talking about it and hearing other people's experiences, hearing different scenarios that you can then gather your mind and figure out how to apply those tools to this scenario. So, so yeah, so I'm going to go over a little bit of what we did work on in that retreat. And where? Ah, okay. So Jessica, she covered some beautiful subjects like connecting to the sacred, figuring out what was sacred for you and creating that sacred space in your life. So I'm not going to go too far into that other than saying like maybe check out some of the things that Jessica does. She she really brought her beautiful, wise, soft, very narrative description of what is sacred to her, what has been sacred with her ancestors, and really inviting people to create that in their life because it's important that we experience the feelings of awe and wonder and connection because those are all connected to the feelings of joy and purpose and community and connection to each other. So I do see that there is a Jess on this call, but I'm not sure who, so I'll let her remain anonymous unless she wants to jump in. So the retreat, just to go over with you, give you like just a little peek in. Uh, you know, people came from everywhere. People came from the UK, people came from the East Coast, from the Yukon in Canada, and and it was such a diverse group of people. We had 15 people. There were 3 men, which was wonderful to have male energy in the group because, we're all such a balance of the two sides of the feminine and the masculine. So it was really nice to have that. We had 2 women who were both engineers. So to have the engineer mind really added to it as well. And the thing that is so missed, I think, is that in-person community. I my whole goal is to just create in my life the things that I want. So everything is definitely selfishly created by me because I want more experiences having, sorry, I'm a little congested, having these in-person experiences with other people, having a sense of community, building that community, having things in nature, time spent in nature, hearing other people's wisdom and their stories. I love people's stories. I love hearing how people have grown in their life and what they've learned from their life. So it really created that for us. And, it was going to be hot. It was like 100 degrees every day. And we never really felt it. We had places to be in the shade. would put our legs in the pool, and we just shared a lot. And the wisdom wasn't just coming from us as presenters, it was really being cultivated by everyone in that group. And everyone was so vulnerable in the sense of sharing their wisdom, but also sharing the air, where they're looking for help and guidance and what they're struggling with right now. And that is, I always feel very honored for that, because that is a big share. And so all the time we spent in circle, all the time we spent around the table sharing food and having discussions and lively conversations, and the ways that we saw ourselves in each other, and then combining that with the nature that is so very present and up close at that ranch of the Schillers in Paso Robles, bald eagles flying by, hawks and birds. And Jess and Warwick went for a walk and saw a bobcat, and we saw deer just outside the door. And it just speaks to something so primal and wild and needed inside of me, and from what I heard back from others as well. So I would really encourage people to all of us. I think we need more of that. And I don't know about you guys, but I definitely will tend to make other things way more important than things like going for a walk in nature or going to the beach, because I got that little thing of like, you should go to the beach and sit on the beach and just, but I've got things to do. I have work to do. I have laundry to do. Look at my room. It looks like a 16-year-old trying to get ready for the prom. Like, uh there's so many things to be done. But as my aunt used to say, a lot of those things, you're going to do them today, and they're just going to need to be done again tomorrow. Let go of the perfectionism or the feeling that you need to be something for other people before feeding your own soul. Because when your cup is empty, you really don't have a lot to give others. So, and that was really one of the big topics of the retreat, was about, you know, how, especially I think empathetic people, we tend to feel really good about helping others. There's a good feeling we get when we do for others, but we can do it sometimes to a fault, and then we don't give to ourselves. And then what happens is other people start to expect that level of giving from us. And then we become trapped by our own feelings of what started off as organic. Like, I want to do this for you because I love you, and this is my expression of love, and I want to support you and care for you, or I'll be the one that drives you to the airport and picks you up, or I'm going to be the one, that cooks your dinners or your meals for you when you're overwhelmed, or bring you out to whatever the thing is. But then people start to expect it. And then suddenly we find ourselves in these positions where maybe a boundary has to come in, where we have to say, I love doing these things for you, but it's just not possible for me to do them all the time. And I really can't, and I really don't want to do them all the time, because I do have other things that I need to do. But, that doesn't mean in the future that there isn't things that I absolutely will show up for you for and with you for, and you can always talk to me. But that conversation, which just sounded so easy, is one of the most avoided, difficult conversations for people. And we really realize, and a lot of the things that people really responded to was that the biggest thing that needs a shift is around this idea of giving enough to myself, filling enough of my own cup so that I have stuff to give others if I choose to. And where do I start? Where do I end? Like, where do I end and the other person begins? Where are the lines? And how do I talk and share in love when I need to change a relationship boundary? So I wanted to go over just a few of the things first that were shared. And then I would really invite anyone on the call who has any situation that they find themselves in. You know, we all find ourselves in these situations, in these types of relationships. Some people have great boundaries. I mean, I am in all of those people. And it's so funny because so much of the story that we have is that if we had those boundaries, no one would love us. No one would love us because the love is based on what we do. It's based on the actions and the way that we solve problems for others or do for others, but we're not innately lovable. And if we start pulling back, then people will be angry with us. People will dislike us, will be abandoned, will be seen as rigid and hard. And what's funny is when I think about the people in my life that have very clear boundaries, I don't see them as any of those. In fact, I feel like the relationship I have with those people is much cleaner and easier. It's cleaner because I'm not sitting there trying to read between the lines. So, like, if you have a friend, let's say, that is always, oh, let me help you with that. Oh, yeah, I can do that, or you ask them if they want to join you in something or if they want to help you with something, or maybe you're decorating or renovating and you want to come help me with this thing. And they'll say yes to anything you ask because they don't have that boundary. But you also know they'll say yes when they really can't do it. Like, well, it's not, yes is not the right answer for them. So then what do? You end up, I mean, what I end up doing is then I am trying to read between the lines and having to think for that person, be like, okay, so is it a real yes? Do I think that, and now I'm trying to make the decision for them because I don't trust that they will give an answer that is really indicative of whether or not this is easy for them or not. So then I feel maybe guilty. I don't know. I don't know if I need to maybe not ask them things anymore. You see how it just gets murky and complicated instead of being clean, where I know there's people in my life that I can say, do you want to join me in this? And they will literally tell me yes or no. Or they might say, let me think about it, but they'll come back with an answer and I don't need to second guess. And it keeps the relationship clean because a lot of times when we do those things, when somebody asks something of us, let's say, and then we love that person and we want to be able to do it for them, and we say yes, when really it puts us in a bad situation, maybe we don't have the ability to say yes cleanly. It can make all kinds of other fun things like resentments or covert contracts, frustrations, covert contract being, I'm going to do this for this person, but I have this expectation in my mind of what it's going to look like afterwards, right? So maybe I do this for this person and afterwards they're going to be so grateful to me. And they're just, they're going to tell me how grateful they are, or they're going to come and do this other thing with me, but I didn't verbalize any of that. And when that doesn't happen, then I get to feel resentful, like, wow, I did all this and then I didn't get the thing back that I imagined I would get back, though I never verbalized that. So there's a lot of mind reading going on when we don't have clear boundaries on both sides. We got to. So I wanted to share with you guys a bit of the things that my daughter Lauren and we did a workshop last month on and around boundaries. And this month we're doing one on and around communication because boundaries and communication are like two sides of the same coin. And, you know, we've had this discussion before, and, Bridget, who's on the call here, had a beautiful shift that I have never stopped using from that first time we talked about boundaries a year ago, which is instead of using the word boundaries, using the word clarity. Because the word boundaries, it kind of has this like, you know, I'm ready to fight sound to it. It sounds like rigid, hard line in the sand. I'm creating my boundary. And let me tell you something. If you ever are saying to another human, I'm about to create a boundary, or you're running over my boundary, or you're not respecting my boundary, I just want you to know that you are not in the area of boundary making at all. You never tell a person, all right, I'm going to have to set a boundary here, or because that's not relational. It's not relational. Communication ends as soon as someone feels attacked and puts their boundaries up and put their walls up, not their boundaries, put their walls up, right? So now I am on the defense. If I'm on the defense because you just told me you got to set a boundary with me, then I can't take in information. My ability to do that, my nervous system is activated. I'm in my body, in the feelings of that nervous system. It pulls everything away from my mind and my critical thinking and my ability to listen and hear and learn and share all goes down. So that one of the nuances is that when you do this work, you want to do it from a neutral place, a place of neutrality, or even better, if you can, a place of love. Because you want to make this shift come from a place that doesn't make the other person brace. And you could have a long list of reasons why this person is mean or disrespectful, or you would have a whole story and a whole long list of experiences that you have with this person and how blah 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 blah. That's the past. And you both have been doing the same routine that has you here. Understanding that a boundary has nothing to do with the other person changing or doing any action at all, ever. A boundary is not meant to change another person. If you're doing a boundary and the goal is to change the other person, it's not a boundary, it's a manipulation, it's a punishment. So this is about the self-work. So let's use a simple analogy. Let's say you and your partner, there are some areas that your communication tends to digress down into name calling and yelling. And you keep finding yourself in this spiral. You keep finding yourself in the same ruts. And you don't know how to get out of it. So how that would look is, how am I showing up? What am I doing in this? Where is my contribution? Which could be, it could be that I am matching my partner and doing the same behaviors. It could be that I am shutting down when my partner goes into this and just sitting there and taking it and feeling bad for myself and feeling stuck and feeling in the corner. So I need to change the way I respond. So The first step would be to make a request. And I want you to understand something. Every step I'm going to go over has nothing to do with the other person. The reason that you start with a request is because for you, you need to feel like you at least gave the other person the option of being clear with them about what you see isn't really working for the both of you, and an idea that you have about how you two could move forward, and give them the option of either meeting you halfway and agreeing. They could agree. Here's the options. They could agree and then not do it. They could agree and do it, or they could disagree and state that they're not doing that. But now you can then move on to the next level and feel good about that because you gave the soft approach, which is, can I make a request? And a lot of people who really need to learn boundary setting, they do this kind of pendulum swing where the frustration builds up and builds up and builds up. And then they're now angry and resentful. And then they make a big boundary, huge, right? You're not going to do this, and you can't do this with me anymore. And it feels really good in the moment to like make all these declarations. But then they don't feel energetically a match to that. Because once their nervous system comes down, once the pressure goes away, once everything returns to kind of a peaceful place, they completely throw it all out the window. And they take away any of the clarity or boundary setting that they were trying to do because they made it in anger and they didn't feel like it was fair and they weren't connected to it. And now it just makes more confusion for the other person. And it's less likely that you're going to have any meeting of the minds. So how this might look is to say to a partner, hey, okay, let me back up. You only want to have this conversation if you are at a neutral place. You cannot have this conversation when your whole nervous system is activated right after an argument, in the middle of an argument, when an argument is building. You have to do it from a place of love and neutrality and softness. And when you feel like you're that in that place, you can get to that place. That's when you broach the subject. And the problem is that we usually are so conditioned that pressure builds up, pressure, 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 pressure. Then the explosion happens. And then we go back to this like relief state that we're after the pressure and we're after the explosion, and nobody wants to touch it because it feels so good to not have that pressure right now. Why would I want to have that conversation? Why do I want to open Pandora's box? Why do I, so we avoid, 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 pressure, pressure, build, 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 explosion. And we repeat this over and over again. So what you have to do is be no longer unconscious about what's happening. You have to be present. You have to look at this like you're going to be proactive instead of reactive. And that means that you might have to have this conversation, have a conversation, a request, when everything has just blown up a few days ago or a week ago, and everyone's at this neutral state. And trust that you are coming from the place that you want to actually fix this. So when you're in that place, then you maybe broach the subject and say, hey, I've been noticing that we have kind of gotten into a pattern where we have these arguments and they turn into fights and they turn into us, yelling at each other, name calling. And I don't want to keep going down that road with you. You know, I love you. I care about you. I want us to have good, healthy communication. So I've been thinking about ways that I can do that, ways that I can do that. So my request is if we find ourselves going into that spiral again, would you be willing for us to just notice when we're getting upset and going into that same thing, and maybe just let's just put a pin in that conversation. Let's agree to wait till we come back down. Maybe we can say, look, let's take a break and come back and see if we can talk about this in an hour, because we've started to go into the pattern, and see how that works, right? Or maybe let's try this tomorrow, but have a time in a day that you're going to come back to it, because there's a lot of nuance in boundary setting. And sometimes it's easy to view it as an abandonment, right? Where, all right, you're doing something that I don't like, and now I'm leaving. But if we don't put a time or some type of container around that leaving, it can just look like full on withdrawing from the relationship with no idea of when you're coming back. So now it can feel like punishment, right? So we don't want it to be that. So look, give it a time. I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about this. But the request could be, would you be willing to try and change this with me? And then based on how they respond, maybe they are, and maybe that works. If it doesn't, then the next step might be, hey, this seems to be harder than maybe I first thought. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start. I can't keep doing this because it makes me go into an area that I don't want. I don't think that this is helpful. So when I feel myself getting into that place, I'm going to pull a timeout, and I'm going to, tell you and maybe, share with you when I feel like I'll be ready to talk about it again, and see if we can do that. But that I think is what I'm gonna start doing. That's a boundary, but it doesn't feel like, hey, next time you call me a name and you raise your voice to me, I'm out of here. I'm not doing it, right? This is my boundary, creating a boundary. You can't do that to me anymore. I mean, you see how the two feel completely different, completely different. Now, remember also, you have the ability to escalate any way that you see that is needed. So let's say you have an immature partner, and saying that if it gets to this point and I'm activated, I am going to take myself out of this conversation until I'm calm again. I'll tell you when I'm going to return, and we'll work on that. You could have a partner that says, oh, hell no, you can't leave this discussion. I'm talking to you. And then let's say you try to go into another room and that person follows you and wants to continue arguing. Well, now you have an escalation. So now you have to have plan B. What is plan B? Well, plan B could be, okay, well, if I've seen this pattern before in my relationship and I know that this is possible, plan B is I'm going to get in my car, I'm going to drive to the park, I'm going to drive to the beach, I'm going to go for a ride, maybe go to a friend's, go somewhere until I can recalibrate my nervous system. Hopefully my partner can too. And then I'm going to go home, and I'm going to tell them when I'm leaving, look, I'll be back in an hour, right? Let's try and talk about this again. If my partner takes my keys, if my partner blocks the door, now there's an escalation again. And now, is that a call to someone who can come and help? Is that a family member that can come and help? Is that the police? And I know that this sounds very high of an escalation, but here's where people don't follow through with boundaries and make the situation worse in their relationships because they don't have a plan B. They don't see how they hold that boundary, where their power is. Your power does not exist in affecting and changing the other person. Your power only exists in affecting and changing yourself and what you do and how you show up. So I know, well, I don't know, but I imagine either the people listening to this have either been in a relationship like this, or they see other people and know people who are or have been in relationships like this. And the other person has learned that as long as they keep escalating, your boundary will come down. That they can totally push over your boundary if they just go as far as they go. So, having said that, I want to add in a kind of warning in this. If you are in a relationship that you don't feel physically safe in, if you're not safe, then this may not be safe for you to set a boundary. And you may need to really get present with the idea and come to terms with the fact that you aren't safe and need help in starting to try and shift your relationship and not do this on your own. So I do want to put that in there because the type of mental health issues that lead to people being violent or controlling and manipulative in ways that are very scary, they do not respond well to the people that they are trying to control suddenly realizing that they have their power over their own self. And they will die. Well, they will throw everything in the kitchen sink at that boundary to take it down because you cannot know that you have choices because it breaks the whole bubble that they've created. So these boundaries are meant for people who are not in such a severe situation. But I will say that when you work in couples counseling, one of the things that they'll tell you is if you want to know if you're dealing with someone, one of the ways to know if you're dealing with someone who is demonstrating maybe narcissistic tendencies or borderline tendencies or any of these things, set a boundary. Like the smallest one, doesn't have to be big, could be the smallest one, tiny. They will throw themselves against that until it's gone. Like it will not stand. So it just means that in order to address this, you're going to have to come from a completely different place and you're going to need help because a lot of these relationships rely on cognitive dissonance where you don't, the fights, everything, the way things are, the lies, the manipulations lead to you not knowing what's right or what's wrong, you not even knowing what's left or right, or it's a total haze about everything. And you start to feel like you're crazy. And you start to feel like maybe you're the problem because everything gets projected. So back to boundaries with relatively healthy people. So now the reason that you need those A, B, and C is because you need to see that this has to be where I have my power is over me. So if I have A, B, and C, I may never see C ever, right? I never may never, but I have that energy of when I'm doing something that it's clean. And that when the other person can see that I'm fully committed in that way, it cuts out so much back and forth because people sense when you're, when you set a boundary like a question mark, like, um, well, I'm not going to do this. And then you stand there waiting for the argument or you waver, and then you waver and then, you've just made the whole relationship more confusing, the whole topic more confusing. Like you're not committed. So then they see that in you and then they know that like I could just show up with a different alternative perspective and this is all going to crumble. So, um, I want to talk about just a little bit throw in here. People see boundaries as confrontation. I think we all can see making boundaries. It's a confrontation. But I just want to challenge you to think about this a little bit differently. Confrontations are aggressive. This is not aggressive. It's just clear. It's just clear. And instead of a confrontation, think of it as a carefrontation. It's a carefrontation because if this relationship didn't matter to you, nobody is going into all this work. Nobody is going into the discomfort and the stretch and everything for a relationship that doesn't matter to you. The relationship matters. That's why you're having the hard conversations. So if you see it as, wow, this is like the greatest form of commitment because I am shifting my avoidant, fearful view of confrontation and I'm challenging it and I'm working to be proactive in this because I want the deeper relationship with you. I want us to have that. And I want to feel like we can work on things and change things that aren't working for us because they're going to come up throughout our lifetime and these skills we'll use them over and over again. Or even if you're having that conversation with yourself, we will use them over and over again. Clear boundaries, having clarity bypasses resentments. Resentments are when somebody else keeps doing something and they're not looking out for ourselves. But we refuse to step into the role of looking out for ourselves. We want the other person to do it. And when they don't do it, we get resentful. Think of it this way. Somebody said this at the retreat, and it was really funny. It really like clarified something for me. Because they started looking at some of their relationships and going, yeah, I can see how that's going. But I could tell that when they were talking about how they're going to go back and deal with it, that there was this defensive energy about it, right? There was this, it had a charge to it. And I said, one thing that I want to add is when we are avoidant, of speaking clearly, when someone comes and says something to us or does something that forces us, we see it as forcing us to be clear about what we're here for and what we're not for, or what we're not going to do. We're angry that they made us now have to be clear. Like we're mad that they're making us have a boundary and tell them where we stand and where we don't, instead of seeing it as an opportunity. So our response has this like, damn it, we're mad that you're making us say this. So just check that. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Um, so let's talk about faux boundaries a little bit. We've already talked a little bit about it, but so boundaries. I call them faux boundaries because we've all seen them and maybe we've done them. I know I have. And it's a boundary that is set that isn't really, it's not a boundary. So faux boundaries are done in retaliation. They're a power grab. I have a boundary, right? I'm taking power. They come off as a line in the sand that you can't cross. You can't cross my line. So now I put the responsibility again of holding that boundary on the other person. And then when they don't do it, I get to feel all of my resentments and all my lack of power and all my victimhood and all the same spiral again. Um, a faux boundary would be a boundary created in anger when we're activated. And the bad thing about that is that usually it's a bigger boundary than we're ready to make, so it doesn't last because it's fueled by that energy. The faux boundary can look like a way to manipulate the other person into doing what you want. And they're not done in love. They're not done in neutrality. They're not done with forethought. So, what is a boundary? What is a good boundary? I have a few good questions to ask yourself when you see an area of your life that you go, I need clarity in this. This is messy. There's a whole story going back and forth. There's a rut we're in. We keep playing this out. I keep playing this out with this person, whether it's at work, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a friend, whether it's a parent, adult child, or romantic relationship, a sibling. When you see that continue to play out, and you want to change it. So ask yourself this. The first one, have I waited for my nervous system to be calm and my mind clear before I approach this? The second one, is the purpose of my boundary clear to me? Like, have I really thought about this? And look, you can go really small when you're starting. Go small. Don't go big. If you've got a huge issue with someone, start small. If you go big before you have that muscle built and that clarity, then you might risk going backwards, which just makes things worse. So is my boundary clear to me? Am I committed to keeping this boundary? I will say, and I want to stress this, first, be committed. Don't set a boundary that you are not 100% committed to keeping. And it's okay if you make mistakes because you've not done this before. So you might do something and go, oh, that doesn't sound, that thing I just did doesn't seem in integrity with what I'm trying to do. I think I got emotional. It's okay. But these are the things that are going to really help you clarify if you're in the right place. So am I committed to keeping this boundary and commit to it? And even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's uncomfortable, I'm doing something new. Is any of this boundary relying on the other person to take action or change? Because if it is, you got to go back to the drawing board because that's not a boundary. Your boundary is only in relation to what you can do in yourself. It's about you. Of course, we want the other person to change in the way that would make the boundary better and like, but if that's your end goal, if that's where your focus is, then your focus is off. And then it's more of you're trying to manipulate, even if it's a good thing that you're trying to get the other person to do. But it's the focus is on getting the other person to change. And so easy to slip into that. And it changes the whole dynamic. You have to stay focused on yourself. I'm taking myself out of those arguments, but not abandoning the relationship. So I'm going to take myself out of the argument, but I'm also going to stay in communication of when I'm coming back to try and be relational and try to connect and reconnect and keep the connection going. And I might have to do that. Look, I'm going to tell you, let me tell you a couple stories, two stories. The first one is funny. So this is the hardest thing you're ever going to do. And the reason I know that is because 90% of the people that I've worked with squirm under this. They feel like they're in it. They're like looking at this and going, I can see this pattern in so many different areas, and they can feel the fear and resistance to doing it. So, and this is how big it is. So Terry Real, I've talked about him before. He's a relational therapist. He created RLT, and he does a lot of work with couples who are in relationships with people who are demonstrating really toxic behaviors. Okay. And he takes those on. But okay, so couple comes to him. They have an adult daughter, and the adult daughter has moved back into the house. And it's not working out great. You know, the daughter is kind of a hoarder. She's messy. All of the things they've asked of her, she just ignores them and doesn't do them. She's also uses, maybe that's a judgment, but in this sense, in this way, just bear with me, uses her feelings as ways to resist any expectation of her. So, in other words, but I'm depressed or I'm overwhelmed, therefore I can't show up. I can't be accountable, which though we can have empathy for that. A lot of times agreeing with that is actually the worst thing we can do for the other person because we actually underline the idea that we also see them in that way and we can disempower people. That's general. It's obviously on a basis, on a case by case basis. But back to the story. So now her stuff is moving from her room out into the hallway and into the house. And nothing they say is changing. They've tried putting it back in her room. It starts moving out again. So Terry tells them about, look, you're going to have to start setting some boundaries. You're going to have to take action. What you're telling me is that you're talking and talking and talking, but there's nothing to back it up. And it's being avoided and ignored. And so you have to figure out what action you're willing to take to start to change this behavior from your part where you have power. Okay. Couple leave. Couple weeks, they come back and they're all smiles. And they say, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Everything has been fixed. We're so happy. We couldn't have done this without you. And so he's like, wow, this is a great example of how this works. And, like, I'm a great therapist. Look at this. We had this couple sessions and this is all fixed. And he says, so tell me what happened. Tell me what you did. Like, what action did you take? And they said, oh yeah, we moved. We moved out. We got a place a couple blocks away. We left her there. And yeah, it's great. And he's like, I am the worst therapist in the world. How did this happen? But it's just an example of how much we will avoid going into this work with people we love. How much we will avoid it. Um, the other story I want to tell you is also from Terry Real, and he talks about a woman who grew up in a family that raged. She said that her whole family were ragers. Everything was screaming and raging at each other, screaming and raging at each other. And, she was committed that when she grew up and she had a family, she was not going to subject her children to that kind of energy all the time and that kind of environment. And, what, I can't remember, I don't even remember what I said myself, but that whole idea of, what we resist, we repeat. There was the program there. That was normal. That was what her subconscious was programmed for. So she found herself married with children with a great life, and she was a rager. So her work was, listen, when you and your husband start to move into a charge exchange, you feel it, right? Usually it's like in your gut, in your diaphragm, you start to feel that energy build up. That's the nervous system beginning to activate. That's the moment that you back out. That's the moment that you go, okay, I can feel myself activating. And she was doing this with her husband. He was all on board, right? I have to back out then and then try to come back once my nervous system has regulated. So what she did was they had this deal that when that happened, she called timeout and she would leave. Because if she stayed, boom, the rage is coming, right? Once that train gets going, it's not stopping. So it happens, right? They're having a discussion, starts to turn into an argument. She feels that and she's like, time out, goes into the bedroom, closes the door, sits on the bed. Now in there, it's all, oh, it's coming, it's all coming on, right? So she waits. She waits, she stays with it, breathes, waits for it to come down, waits to feel like, okay, I'm back to center. She gets up, she walks across the room, puts her hand on the door handle, and it starts again. Oh, not ready. Sits back on the bed, waits for herself to calm down, waits for her nervous system to reset. Gets up, crosses the room, puts her hand on the door handle. Oh my gosh, okay. Sits back on the bed. She was in that room for over 30 hours. Her husband brought food and slid it under the door, like open the door, put the food in, close the door. 30 hours overnight into the next day until finally, at one point, she stood up, walked across the room, touched the door handle, and there was nothing. And she said she never raged. She never had that happen again in her relationship with her husband because she had to reset the nervous system. But she was committed to doing it. Now imagine if she had said, "You can't say these things to me anymore because you're making me rage. You're making me crazy." How many times you heard that? You make me crazy. What are the chances that I would have ever changed? Commitment to change is the most powerful thing. Follow through, clarity. And this affects every area of your life. It will affect all of your relationships. It can affect your health. It will affect your careers or the things that you want to create in your life. It can affect your finances. A lot of people have lack clarity around their finances. They give money away a lot. They do things to make sure that they never are above a certain level because they don't feel worthy of being supported by the universe and the energy of money and possibility. So they give away or do things that undermine that because they can't set a boundary. They feel like they can't set a boundary. So this covers everything. This will touch every area of your life. So here's the trick. Here's the part that is the part before the part. The core of this is self-trust. And one of the reasons that we become avoidant is because we don't trust ourselves to follow through. We don't trust ourselves to maintain that clarity, to commit to making things better for ourselves and the other person. Because maybe our childhood, our conditioning has always been to appease, to be supportive, to be the person that doesn't have any weight to them, right? I've got to be, I'm the one that flows with everything and supports everyone else and is agreeable and shows my love by what I can do for you. This is how I show my love. What can I do for you? What can I do for you? And if we don't trust ourselves, then we're not going to trust the process. So start really small. Start really small. Build up from there. Start with someone you care least about in something and try it out. I'll tell you a quick story about this is kind of I guess this is a boundary. It is a boundary. Um, and it was a really hard one. And it's funny because my daughter brought this one up to me. And I hadn't even thought of it as a boundary, but she knew the story. So the story goes, and I'm going to not say names or anything like that. I went to see someone that I had trained with in the past. And I very much respected this person's work. They had invited me to come to this, and they invited me to stay with them at their house. And I did. And I went. And I was seeing a lot of things that just didn't feel supportive. They didn't, they were defensive. Um, the energy was not inviting for other ideas. Any other idea was seen as a challenge. And there were groups of us. We were broken up into groups and we had to do this exercise. And so my group, we created this exercise, and then you have to explain the exercise. And there was a there was the notes back were very, they were kind of harsh, but which was totally separate. The thing that was the big thing was nobody was allowed to finish explaining what we were doing or why. And there was a lot of jumping in and jumping on before all of the information was out. And I was getting activated. I was getting activated by that because half the time the thing that was being interrupted with, had they let me finish, would have been understood. And in that moment, I had to say, listen, it becomes very difficult for me to be able to express an idea or a thought or an opinion or anything. If I keep getting interrupted, then I forget where I was, and it's hard. It's not something that works for me. And I would just ask if I could please finish. And I am open to any feedback if I can just finish explaining quickly what this is. And, I got some snarky comments back and things like that. But I still stood with that. And that was really hard when you're staying at someone's house and you are invited to something. I mean, I wasn't paying like other people. I was invited to this. That was not where I wanted to be. I did not want to be challenging someone in front of other people in their own backyard. But it had gotten to the point over days that I was lying, and I would have had to really shove down a part of me. And by doing that, I was also, by not saying it, I'm like in alignment now. Like I could be seen as being in alignment with this way of teaching, or it just wasn't in integrity. And I didn't have to address everything. But in that moment, I just had to address that. And it wasn't easy, but actually, it felt clean. It felt clean. And we even talked about it afterwards. And I don't know, it's none of my business whether or not the way we talked about what was talked about landed or not, in the sense it seemed like it did, but like it's, you know, I'm not attached to how it was perceived. I I showed up in integrity for the relationship and the conversation, and in integrity for the people that I was working on this with, that I also saw were a little bit taken aback by how things were going. Does that make sense? I mean, it might not be the clearest boundary because it's not a person that I have like ongoing relationship with, but it also talks about, sometimes we're in settings that feel really hard. And it doesn't mean like you need to do that all the time, but sometimes you're in a corner where you're either you're either going along or you're setting some clarity. And you have to make a choice. And I kind of had to make a choice in that sense. So I would love to kind of open this up to if anybody has anything that anything that they're going through right now or that has been on repeat or any questions even like to clarify this. The last thing that I would add when I was talking about the boundaries and asking yourself questions is, do I have a plan A, B, and C? Do I have contingency plans to this boundary that I'm setting? I'm never saying to anyone that I'm setting a boundary. I'm never using that word. I'm never putting anything on the other person. But do I have contingency plans? Do I have like A, B, C, maybe even D, so that I can see how I follow all the way through with this, so that I don't get to a place where, oh, they did this and now I have no other option, right? I have no other, I've no next move. So yeah, I'll turn it over. Nobody. Oh, wow. I must have really hammered this in.
I'll jump in with something. I'll just say first, that was a lot of really awesome information. I got a lot out of like that. Just your steps in asking for clarity was really helpful and keeping it small. Sorry, my dog is shifting around and knocking my computer. Um, I mean, I wasn't even gonna bring this up, but I would say I think one area in my life I really struggle with, and I don't even know if this is a boundaries area, is within like my household and organization and cleanliness. And me and my husband are opposite. And I struggle deeply. And it's like one of the main places that we have tension and fights is I want things clean and clear because I'm usually the one that has to clean it all. And he has a different mind that wants everything out everywhere. So, how do I go in that? I was thinking about like, what are the things? I'm sure I have a big part in it. Like, how am I not being flexible? How am I not, listening? How am I doing these? But I don't know if you have any thoughts of how to approach that type of a scenario, because it's an everyday thing. You're living when you're co-living with somebody and you're both stuck in your ways. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. First,
I
the
should, sorry, I should preface this with I bring my own baggage into it, growing up in a toxic home where things were always chaos and messy. And so I over want control and cleanly. Like I bring my trauma into that space. So I should add that in there.
Sure. Sure. No, of course. That makes total sense. I think what I find helpful is to first take a bit of a distance, like pull back from the relationship and look at you and your husband as individuals and ask yourself this question. If we weren't married, if we weren't together, is this just who he is? Like, is he doing it to me or is this just who he is? So if he's a person that doesn't value that, right? Which he likes everything to be out. He likes things to be where he can see them and leave piles, or he just doesn't have that organizational chip,
Mhm.
right? Um, well, that means that I'm pushing a boulder up a hill. It also means I'm not able to accept him as he is. Doesn't mean that things can't change, but I first have to accept that I am choosing to do the cleaning. Not I have to, I'm left to, I'm the one that has to. I'm choosing to do the cleaning because that matters to me. So bringing yourself into that space first. Here's the second part. You can make a request, but start small, right? Start small. And if you get 15% of that request, you better give a lot of positive affirmation for that try. What we do is we go, I need all of this, right? I need all of this. And when you do this much, I don't want to give you too much positive because that's so small. You know, like, oh boy, you tried a little bit. I need this. And we're afraid if we give positive feedback for this little bit, that they'll just be stuck there. Then they'll just be thinking just picking up their socks is all they need to do. And then I'll go back into my story. And it builds resentment, right? Because what we do is we project onto it meaning. You don't do these things that I care about, therefore you don't care about me. You're fine with me working this hard, or you're fine with me being upset. That's what I see. I'm creating the stories. And the stories, when I think, it goes back to when I think that thought, how does that thought make me feel? What feeling am I creating? And then what action am I taking when I feel that way? Oh, well, I withdraw or I become passive aggressive or I shut down um, or I become snippy or whatever it is, right? So first I got to watch my thoughts. I have to start. There's no space here. This is like a vacuum. There between us, there's no space in this. So I have to start creating space. The only way I can do that is by checking myself. How do I look at this differently? Can I look at it as, do I choose to do this? Or do I have a story that I have to do this? That I'm being made to do this? Because I can choose to do it, or I can decide how it looks. So there's so many options here. You can change the way what your relationship is to it. You can look for the ways that your husband shows up in ways that you don't and try to find a connection to this is part of the balance between you. Some of us will be good at things and some of us will not be good at things. Do I feel that there can be balance here? Do I feel like I can see this differently? What if I bring it up like this? Look, instead of me feeling like overwhelmed by the amount of this that I have to do, I could make a request that says, can we bring, can you pay to bring someone in once a month to do a deep clean and I'll maintain between that, right? Or twice a month. I'll do all the maintenance between, right? I'll take on that job. Let me ask this. What of these, see, these are the things that I do. What of these things would you be willing to try doing? Would any of these, right? Instead of like me deciding what, would you be able to try to do any of these? Would you be willing? Would you be willing to try any of these? And then really supporting that person because this is not in their nature. It's not in their nature to pick up after themselves or to put things away or to be organized. It's not done to you. It's not in their nature. So without the story, you can see them more as someone who this just isn't in them. So how can I be the person that takes a little bit of a proactive role in trying to clear out the resentments that have been building around this and find commonality, common ground, relational ways to try to bridge the gap and taking accountability in that for the way I've behaved up to now so that the person knows that this isn't just another way of trying to get what I want done, right? Look, I have to express that I know this is me. I know you're not doing this to me, even though that sometimes I create a story that, this just shows you don't see me or care about me or love me enough or whatever it is. I know that's a story. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I get harsh or nag or any of those things because I know that my story makes me do that. But what's also true is that it is a lot of work, right? So can we come together and maybe try different things together? This is not a test of you, right? I just want to know, would you be willing to like try some things together so that, we can be closer and more relational and we can, really stretch as a couple because we can look at something that's been this like ongoing thing and let's imagine different ways of looking at this and trying. And it's just a try, right? We're just going to try. Do you see how that there's like all different, like when we get out of the story and the feeling of it, that there's all different ways that we could approach it as long as we take accountability and we're soft and open and we create a space for the other person to step into and be involved in it, right? Have the feedback from them and maybe even ask them, how has this been for you? Right?
Mhm.
How do you see this? How have you experienced this conflict that we have had? Because I do really want to hear how it has felt for you.
I love that. That's really helpful. I think just like releasing the story and the judgment around it and getting out of my own like right and wrong mindset and starting small. That's small wins.
Yeah, like could you hang up your towel after your shower? Right? Like, but you don't want to tell them that. But like the idea of maybe that's what, maybe that's what he might say to you. Well, what are the things? What are the things that drive you crazy? And you might say, why don't we just do one thing? Just
Mhm.
let's just start with one thing. I don't want this to be a big deal, right? Like, let's just start with how about, starting to try to implement the habit of hanging up your towel after a shower and not leaving it on the floor. Just that one thing, right? And when he does it, high five, right? Like awesome, or something not condescending, but you know what I mean? Like, thank you, thank you for doing that. I see you trying. And you can make jokes about it, like a joke and making it funny is always helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else got anything that they have experienced or any questions or any examples that they want to help in? Do,
I
do,
could
do,
jump into
do.
something.
Okay.
I think it's also in going through this process a perfectly acceptable end result to decide that you don't want to accept the actions or the behaviors that you're trying to find peace with. And that perhaps the situation you're in is not the situation you need to stay in.
Agreed. Agreed. Um, I think that is one of the things about getting clarity is that a lot of times, and it's a good thing to bring up, a lot of times our appeasement or our resentment or the way that we're not being proactive is because we're afraid that if we actually looked at things and actually took up space and started to have clarity around things, that we would actually be face to face with the fact that maybe this isn't a doable relationship. Um, I will say that a lot of times the fear of that is a story that when people actually do this, that they find that there is a lot more ways that they can grow together than what they previously were afraid of. And the other is true too, that they could find that all of the ways that they've been avoiding, now that it's in the light, this is just, it's not repairable. That both sides are not willing or able to offer repair or to see and meet. Because, look, like we said, boundaries are you taking action. So if the other person is unwilling to ever do anything, there's going to be a point in time where that road may end, right? Where it's no longer worth the investment because there's nothing coming back that is sustainable. And I love the idea that, look, relationships are not transactions, right? If you're bean counting, you're in the wrong mindset. What matters is it worth it to you? Because maybe you have a friend who is super flaky and it drives you nuts. You have two choices, right? Maybe you've tried things, whatever. This is just who they are. Two choices. Either that friendship is worth it to you. You'll accept the flakiness because you love that person and it's worth it to you. Or it's not. And both things are okay.
I think that's the piece that we need to hear more often, is that both things are okay. Because I think I have known people, and I've spent some time myself in places that didn't suit me, couldn't suit me,
Mm-hmm.
because what I needed and wanted wasn't what the other person was able to reasonably give. My
Yeah.
request was reasonable, we're unable or unwilling. And I think sometimes we find fault with ourselves. What's wrong with me that I can't make this work?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with me that I accept, that I can't make peace? Am I the unreasonable one? And I think we can spiral into those questions that end up feeling like blame of self
Mm-hmm.
and cloud us looking at a situation that's really not for us.
Mm-hmm. No, I 100% agree. Like this is a process. It's not like a do A plus B and you will have the answer to all your life's questions with C, right? It's these are just really healthy, intentional ways of being, ways of not being. How many people are asleep in their life, right? So many people are unconscious and asleep and complain and about the situations in their life, and they don't step into the space of how am I showing up and what choices do I have and how do I be in the place where I am starting to be proactive about what I'm seeing and not doing old patterns or running away in fear or being avoidant. And the truth shall set you free. That's the thing about when you go to a really good couples counselor, they will say in the beginning, I am not here to fix your relationship. I'm not. What I'm here to do is to support you individually to show up in a way that is better for you, that is healthier and cleaner. That then, as you do that, you're better in your relationship. And then we get to see what we have here. Is there anything left to repair and build on? Or is this now we've actually got clarity of how to uncouple in a way that is respectful and loving as best it can be, even if you're the only one holding that space. Um, Naomi asked a question about ways to build trust, self-trust. She says, do you have any other suggestions on how to build self-trust? It really resonated with me when you explained the relationship between avoidance, appeasement, and people pleasing. My love is what, and people pleasing in my love, and that's what I can do for you. So the way that you build self-trust is with time and intention. Again, you start small and you start to, we could probably have a whole other conversation on this. So I will say that I'm probably not going to say is enough right now for you to get a full picture, but I will say that every time you show up in truth and for yourself, and every time you see yourself say no, then you are building that self-trust, because the story is if you say no, people will leave. People won't love you. People will be angry. They'll start yelling at you and screaming at you. And if our relationships are based on that, then we never get to feel actual love. We never get to actually feel belonging because we feel it's conditional. So it's really important to challenge these things and be able to say no. Uh, Jessica Whiteplume had a great example at the retreat because her husband, Marty, is he is a walking, talking, amazing example of clarity and being able to say no. And she said she joked, she said, if anybody calls Marty, they should know that they're on speaker because he listens to every call on speaker. But he also, he has a leadership role in a lot of ways in his community. And so people work under him. And somebody had called him and they were explaining how they had talked to this other person and then they had talked to that person about this way to get more hours for themselves and that they needed these more hours, and that other person had shared this whole way that they could get hours, but they all said that he needed to call Marty and run this by Marty and tell Marty like how he would like to have these hours, and what do you think? And Marty said, no. And there was this long pause. And then the guy says, all right, cool. Well, I'll see you on Monday at work, and thanks a lot. I'll talk to you later. And Jess said she was like, when the guy was saying all this, in her mind, she's thinking of like, well, the conversation would look like, well, I can't do that because of this and blah, 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 or and it was just no. And he was so sure of his no and connected with his no that all of the stories just fell away. And there was no issue. And everybody moved on. And believe me, when I say people can sense when you're not committed to your response. But I loved that story. So you practice saying no, practice seeing when you're doing that people pleasing. It could be, do it with people you don't care about first, that are not in your life. Like do it out in the world, do it in small ways, because then when you see that the world doesn't end, then you can start really building that muscle in ways that matter even more in your life. And look, read as much as you can, listen to as much as you can, follow as many people as you can that are teaching this, and have faith in yourself, and have a bit of like compassion that you're learning something new. And it goes against so much emotion, so much belief system. Give yourself credit and be kind to yourself and practice. Practice. Every time you practice, you start to build that and see that you're going to be fine. And if somebody ever does blow up, well, the worst thing that you thought could happen happened. And look, you lived. Make sense? All right. Any last questions before we head out? Yeah, Amanda said she's built self-trust through caring for her inner child, tapping into her inner child's needs and responding from there, which sometimes is super helpful, right? Because sometimes what's really, really a good exercise is to, when you're confused, take yourself out of the scenario, put someone you love and care about in your place. And sometimes that can make it really clear what a caring and clarifying response can be because you took yourself out of it. Any last words?
I'd like to hop in real quick and thank you for the story of the interruption, having the courage to say something. And I'm one of those ones who interrupts all the time because I'm afraid I'll forget what I was going to say. And obviously my message is more important than the message I'm listening to. Therefore, I have to interrupt the conversation. I mean, it's I don't mean that intentionally, but that's what kind of happens in my head. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I got to say this before I forget. And when you said that when you get interrupted, that throws you off and loses your train of thought. And I just had a mental shift. It was like, of course. Oh my gosh. And they're the speaker, or, they're the original thought person in the conversation. How could I be so selfish, you know, to think that, I'm more important because I don't. But anyways, I really appreciated that. That hit home hard.
Can I ask you about your story that you have around you interrupting?
Uh, it's it's forever. Like it's been part of my story, and I just am ignorant to it.
What's your
It's
story?
a filter. I've lost a filter, I think.
So is that the story? Is the story
I,
that you are ignorant
I,
and that you don't have a filter? Is that the story?
yeah, you know what? I need to unpack this, don't I? Yeah, interesting.
Because what I
Because I
see,
try to be mindful. Go ahead.
I see someone who's really gets excited about things. I see
Yeah.
somebody that has a lot of questions that like, oh, me too. I want to jump in, right? Have love and care for that person. It doesn't mean that you can't start to exercise the muscle of, like I do. I am that person too. I am the interrupter too. I am both people. Sometimes I'm sitting on my hands to be like, shut up, don't say anything, let
Hmm.
them
Hmm.
finish, right? And sometimes, but see, I also go, if I forget what I was going to say, it's fine. It doesn't matter. So what? The world goes on. Maybe it wasn't meant to be in this,
I
like
know.
be present. Try to keep going into being present. But watch any stories that you tell about yourself that are negative views about yourself because
Yeah.
that's just a story.
Oh my gosh, I'm a volunteer on the Compass Conversation podcast that
Mhm.
you just shared about, right? And we had a Zoom call recently with all of us volunteers. So we're going to be on the podcast, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, okay, here's my opportunity to say what I really think about this conversation, this podcast. And we were calling out people who goes next to speak, right? And somebody had just shared a story of something that it meant to them and threw me completely off. And they called my name, and I was in fight or flight. It
I've
was
never
like,
experienced that. Tell me what that's like. What does that feel like? Because I've never done that.
oh my gosh, thank you. Okay. And then I was apologizing, and oh, I'm so stupid. pass. I mean, and then after it, I thought, can you guys like edit me out? I'm so embarrassed, right? Just edit me out.
Can I
And
tell you a
really,
funny story?
yes.
Okay. So Warwick, after the summit in Birmingham, Warwick asked, he was asking some of the presenters if they would just do like a 15-minute clip for his podcast about, talking to people about what the summit was like. So he and I had two up and coming retreats that we were going to do. So he said, let's have a Zoom call about the retreats. And in that, we'll also record that 15-minute chat. So I was like, great. I put it in my calendar, but I forgot about the 15-minute podcast recording aspect of it. So I am like in my sweats, whatever, running around doing stuff because I'm just going to have a talk about the retreat. And then 15 minutes before we do it, I read my notes and I see that it's also a record. And now I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
like I'm running around, I'm trying to get ready because it's recorded. I don't know if he's going to release the recording or not or what. And now I'm in a state, right? My mind is not good when that happens. And so the part we recorded was, in my opinion, it was terrible, right? Because it was like, I'm going to, anyone that's been to the summit, it's like I'm saying all the things over and over again, like great, amazing, wonderful, hard to describe, like just like the most boring conversation ever. So that got done. I was like, great, I screwed that up, whatever, whatever. After the first retreat, he goes, hey, we still have to record that 15-minute thing. And I was like, yes, yes, we do. Let's set that up. So we do. We set it up. But this time I really, really sat down and thought about what would I want to say about it, right? Because in the past, I've just shown up to things. So now I'm starting to see that things go much better when I do some type of preparation. I think I was afraid to prepare, like afraid to have an expectation of myself. So I just showed up. So now I did this preparing, really thought about what I'd like to say, what I'd like to share. We recorded it. It went great. I was happy with it, right? And got to share so much more. And then I said, by the way, I have something to tell you. I just have something to, a confession to make. And he thought it was hilarious that I totally pretended like we hadn't recorded before. But see, that's the thing, right? We all can have those moments of, oh my God, happened to me on another person's show they invited me on and I got the times wrong because we're in a different, and I went running for this, like running through my house back and forth to get ready and get on it. And I was terrible. I couldn't bring my nervous system down. I couldn't focus. I couldn't find my words. Hey, it happens to all of us. It's going to happen. Like that's the thing. Like, when you
I
start to
love it.
level up and you start to show up, not going to be
And
perfect.
in the scheme of, I mean, nobody really cares,
No,
right? Nobody's really looking at me. Oh my gosh, does she have a retainer on? I mean, all the things that oh, her eyes look a little puffy. They're not thinking of me. I'm really not that important.
no, they're not thinking of you. They're not, and they're giving a lot more grace than we think that they are. Giving a lot more grace. Well, listen, I have so enjoyed this. And I do want you all to know that I'm putting together a 6-week boundary communication course. And I'm probably going to share with you guys a way to sign up for it. I think my goal is to try to get it together at least partially before the holidays because I feel like we can all help. This can really help our communication in the holidays, and especially like all of the relationships we may be revisiting. So that's the goal, but I will give everybody a chance to sign up for it and give you more information. And I'm doing it with my daughter. And one of the reasons that we're doing it together is because the adult child parent relationship is so complex and such an area that could use a lot of love and support, because those relationships really suffer from not having clarity and shifting as we, our roles and in our each other's lives shift. So I'll keep you guys up to date on that. And yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And
Bye,
I'll
everybody.
I'll see you all in November. And some of you that are coming to the summit, I'll see you at the summit. I'll see you at the summit and see you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Christine.
Bye.
Bye.